Welcome to the You Are a Philanthropist podcast. This is episode 19, and today we're talking to Ken Holderman. Ken is a husband, father, grandfather, pastor for missionaries who work primarily in Latin America and the Canary Islands.
Welcome to the You Are a Philanthropist podcast with Jen Klein, a certified fundraising executive and philanthropic entrepreneur. This show is dedicated to empowering and inspiring you to make a difference in your community and our world. Jen believes all acts of kindness matter, and this show is designed to help you take pride in your everyday actions of improving the lives of others and making a change in the world. Now, here's Jen.
Ken, thank you for joining my show.
Glad to be here.
I'm eager to talk to you because a lot of my guests have talked about Jesus as being the source of their inspiration for following philanthropy. And you particularly have led a life of service because of Jesus. So I'd love to know how you got started as a pastor for missionaries.
Well, I guess when I was thinking about talking with you today, my mind went back a little further than that because thinking about the well-being of other people, caring for the advancement of humans, caring about generosity, goes clear back to when I was a child. I remember getting a quarter and a nickel, and the quarter was for me, and the nickel was for God. And I guess back then it would have been worth a lot more than it is now. But I also remember we had maps in our house. We would have missionaries that would come and visit us. My dad taught school in a school district that had a lot of poor, disadvantaged kids. And since he grew up that way as well, he was always reaching out, thinking of others. I remember he took me along to do some house repairs on the house downtown of an older lady that was in a wheelchair and couldn't do it herself. And so I grew up with the example of caring about others and being interested in and realizing that the world was bigger than just my school or my neighborhood.
That's wonderful.
And then, of course, when I got married, my wife is an extremely generous person. And I guess at first that was difficult for me. I thought that it was my money and I wanted to do things with it my way. And she was so generous all the time. And now it's come to the place after 41 years of being together that it's just a natural part of our budget to have something available to help others.
That's beautiful. Our last guest was very honest about the struggle we all have within us to either be selfish or to be generous. And it sounds like your wife just has a generous spirit and that's rubbed off on you.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes it even surprises me how easy it is for me to care about sharing with others, where it was not something that I had. I guess because my parents grew up in the Great Depression, they had to be careful about everything, every penny, every little bit, and be cautious how it was used. And so I got some of that. But hopefully, my children got the generosity part from their parents.
That's also been a theme in season 1 about how important the family unit was growing up. Mostly people's parents being great role models for themselves and the generosity that they now have as my guests, who I like to call our philanthropists. I'm just curious, the individual who gave you that quarter, was that your father and mother?
Yes.
Yeah. And so they taught you to give a tithe, right? Which is biblical. And actually that would be 20%. You gave 20% back to God, and typically in the biblical term you give 10%. Is that right?
Yes, but it wasn't so much about being strict on how much we gave, but it was the idea that it isn't ours, that we receive it from others and we give it out because it makes a difference in so many lives. And so then after we were married a couple of years, my wife and I and our first child went to Venezuela, where we served as missionaries for 7 years. And while we were there, we saw how difficult it was being a missionary, the struggles that you have in living in a different culture, different language, and seeing that even what may have seemed poor in the United States is really quite rich for many parts of the world. And so that's what got us into what we're doing now, because those that are working on the front lines in other countries really do need extra care and support and encouragement. In many cases, they can't earn in the place where they're living a normal wage. And so they need others to be generous with them as well in order for them to continue working and continue reaching out and helping others.
You know, it's so great to hear you acknowledge that it's a struggle for missionaries. Although it's not great to hear they struggle, but it brings more of a human aspect to missionaries, which I think in Christian culture people glorify. And maybe they don't have the opportunity to share their struggles. So the fact that you're a pastor specifically for missionaries and know what they go through, both in the struggle with the monetary aspect of their career, but also in other ways of, I'm sure, culture shock and struggles of dealing with countries that are much different and, like you said, more affluent in America.
Yes, and also trying to understand that the world is a big place and there are a lot of people and there's a lot of needs. And so we do what we can. There's a story that's often told about a little boy that was on a beach and throwing starfish back into the ocean. And an adult came along and said, "Why are you doing that? That's not going to make any difference. You're never going to get all of these starfish off the beach." And the little boy picked up one and threw it in and said, "It matters to that one."
Yes.
So even though we can't do everyone, we can't help all of the need that there is in the world, it matters for the ones that we are able to help.
Yes. And I love that imagery. And it's something that one of my conversations with Jay Foss, who I was a guest on his podcast, Raising Your Inner Voice, and he was a guest on mine, reminded me of the imagery of that starfish and how beautiful that one starfish is, but yet there's all of these starfish that need help, and we're helpless to help them all. But if everybody can do just one little thing for somebody else, then our chances of making the world a better place as a team can really make a difference. And like you said, the one starfish that one person is helping is making a difference.
And what we do in caring for missionaries, I guess if you wanted an official description of it, it would be emotional and spiritual support for cross-cultural workers. It's often called member care rather than missionary care because some people work in areas that are opposed to the Christian faith. And so member care is a more generic type of description. But I've always seen it as when you have a car, you get regular oil change and you try to take care of it so that it keeps running. You don't go and throw it out and buy a new one as soon as it runs out of gas. And so what we're doing is the regular maintenance in helping missionaries so that they don't break down, so that they don't completely run out of gas or have a burnout.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so important. I imagine for missionaries, it's hard to be away from their families as well.
And of course, especially during this time of COVID, because it's hitting everywhere in the world, not just in the US. We've had several of our missionaries who specifically requested more regular times of talking and getting encouragement just because of the extra stress of in countries where the illness is strong and the means of curing it are very weak or non-existent.
This reminds me of therapy a little bit and how important it is to talk with people and hear each other's burdens and encourage each other. It's kind of like a pastoral counseling aspect of your work, which, like you said, is caring for the spiritual and emotional aspect of these missionaries.
No one is surprised if somebody gets sick and has to go see the doctor. But sometimes people tend to look down on emotional care, getting counseling or coaching or seeing a psychologist. And that's really unfair because it's just as much a need as going to a regular physical doctor. That we all have struggles, we all have difficulties, we all have things that we need extra help with. And we should be glad that people are willing to get help rather than just trying to struggle through it on their own.
It's so true. We have this image that we should all be so strong. And yet we're stronger when we get help that we need. And what we're talking about is an organ in our bodies, which is the brain. And so healing the brain through providing new pathways of neurons moving around in your brain through psychotherapy and many different aspects of talking with therapists and taking medications is so important to the well-being of so many people. And it's not something we discuss, as you mentioned, and that's really too bad.
And unfortunately, people who are working on the mission field worry if they're honest about the struggles that people will not support their work, will not give them the care that they need for regular life and support them if they have these struggles. And so they just don't talk about them with anyone. And it helps that we've been on the field, and so they understand that we understand what's going on in their life, and they can be more free. I think another thing that helps is that although we work basically under one mission organization, we're not part of the administration of that organization. So that when people share things with us, they don't have to worry about losing their job or being reprimanded or anything. They can share things openly and honestly because of confidentiality.
That's beautiful. I love how you support people's mental health. It's a critical aspect of our everyday world. I'm curious, did you always have a passion to support people with mental health, or was that something that came about when you were a missionary yourself and you realized the struggles?
I think it's something that I've always had an interest in. In college, I took classes on psychology and took a number of counseling classes in seminary. And then getting out into the real world and seeing that it's a lot more difficult even than the pat answers that I had previously, where people just need the help of others to be the best that they can be. We're not intended to be islands to ourselves.
That's very wise.
I remember in that first term in missions when I was in Venezuela, I wrote an article for the Evangelical Missions Quarterly and talked about how it's so easy for us to feel like we have to be Clint Eastwood, all alone against the world and able to solve everything ourselves. And it just can't be that way if we're going to survive. We need one another. I think that's another reason why it talks about working together as a body in the New Testament, because I can't possibly have all of the gifts that I need to survive. But if I get together with you, if I get together with others in a local congregation, then we can help each other. And where I'm weak, you can be strong. And where you're weak, I can be strong for you.
Amen. I want to take a quick break and we'll get right back to our conversation. Hey y'all, I just want to remind you that I need you to subscribe, rate, and review to this podcast. If you're enjoying it and want more conversations like this and want to help people get more involved with philanthropy, please subscribe, rate, and review. I want to thank you to the people who have already rated this podcast 5 stars. Please click to rate it 5 stars. And here is some awesome reviews. I love hearing the different stories from a variety of people's personalities. We all can contribute with the strengths we have in making the world a better place for all of us to live in. Here's another one. I really enjoy this podcast. It's encouraging to see that I don't have to be a multimillionaire who created a philanthropic foundation to impact people. It's my small gifts of my time and resources that add up. I am a philanthropist. And here's another. There are opportunities all around at an early age to remind us to look out for each other. It's a lifelong journey of seeing the opportunities and acting in them. Thanks for a great reminder. Listeners, please do me a favor, subscribe, rate, and review right now so more people can hear more from us and learn more about philanthropy. Ken, thank you so much for sharing about the background of your experience. And I'm curious about what your favorite aspects are about pastoring missionaries, what your favorite aspects have been about your experience making the world a better place.
That's a hard one.
Well, I know you're a humble guy, so you're not one to brag. So, and I put you on the spot. So I'm curious if you could share just a little bit about what brings you joy about your work.
It brings me joy to see that aha moment in others when I can talk with them and mention something and it strikes a chord in the other person. I recently was able to take a course on coaching others, and it really resonated with me because with counseling, you often have to be the expert. And as a coach, you can just be a curious listener. Thinking more about your earlier question of what brought me joy in ministry, something that came to mind about another period of mission service that we did when we were in the Canary Islands, which is a part of Spain. We were working in a tourist church, and mostly the tourists were elderly people from Europe who would come down to avoid the European winters. And there were those who were escaping problems back home. There were those that were relaxing and enjoying the wealth that they built up during their lifetime. But often they were those that really didn't have anyone on a regular basis that could reach out and care for them. I remember one time someone came to me and just needed a pastor to perform a funeral. The man had no family. There wasn't anyone who was going to show up except a handful of friends from the local restaurant that he would get together with on a regular basis, and he passed away. And it meant a lot to me to be able to help give some respect and honor to this person, even though I didn't really know him. But talking with his friends, asking questions and getting to know who he was and what had happened in his life, and then helping to also bring some comfort and healing for the friends who were now missing the one who had passed away. In another case, we climbed over a wall because an elderly lady didn't answer the door. And when we got in, she was barely conscious. And she was alone in this house. And so we were able to get the ambulance to come and get some help for her. But she was all alone and had no one to call. And we just happened to stop by at the right time. And besides needing other people, we need to have that connection with God so that he can do things that we can't possibly do on our own. Like when this lady needed help, there wasn't any natural or normal way that we would have found out about that. But because we try to be open to hearing what the Spirit is saying, and we were willing to act on that, we were able to actually save that lady's life. She wound up spending weeks in the hospital, and we went to see her there. But she would not have made it if we hadn't arrived at the time when we did. And so it's things like that where you can make a difference, where the things that you do and say are being generous with God's love and with our love and care for others.
Wow. I don't know what to say. Those are beautiful stories about how you cared for people who, were living in loneliness. And Jessica Brand from season 1 said, loneliness is an epidemic. And she started a cookbook club to help people get around a table and have conversations. And it sounds like you have the ability to create community with people who are searching for a community, and the ability to touch people's lives, as you mentioned, is a gift from God, as well as your willingness to serve God and listen to the importance of doing something people wouldn't normally do, like climbing a wall to help somebody who is close to dying.
There's all sorts of philanthropy. I looked in the dictionary, and it seemed to focus more on philanthropy in a monetary sense, and yet we can be generous philanthropists of our time.
I agree. That's why this podcast got started, because I didn't like the definition anymore. The first blog post I wrote about this idea that we can all be philanthropists, I labeled it, "Call Miriam. We're changing the definition." Because as a fundraiser, I saw that wealth was correlated with philanthropy. And as you mentioned, it's really not in everyday situations. Both my former guests, Paul Ott and you, were able to save people's lives by being in the right place at the right time and by choosing to serve people. And I think about Paul and about you and how different your lives were, but how willing you both were to support people that needed support, who weren't valued by society, unfortunately, and you changed their life. And like you said, with that starfish analogy, just helping one of those starfishes is a beautiful thing.
You mentioned that I was a father and a grandfather. I think that what I've noticed in my life about the example that I had from my parents is that we can make a big difference in what happens in the lives of adults by setting an example when they're children. And I didn't know any better. I didn't even think about it. But my parents were giving me an example of being aware of the world. And so just as I was getting out of high school and heading to college, there was a song by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young that said, "Teach your children well." And I think that's so important, to be an example, not just telling them to give to others, but showing them that we give to others, not just saying that we believe in mental health, but showing them, our kids, that we respect and honor those who sometimes need to have help from mental health workers. One of the things that I like about my grandson is that if he's in a group of people, even people that he doesn't know, he will spot the one person in a wheelchair or the one person that's a different color than the rest. And he'll go and strike up a conversation with them and show them that for him, he doesn't see any difference, that they're important individuals and they're worthy of his time and effort and interest. And I think that setting those kinds of examples for our kids, encouraging that, and of course not pulling them back and telling them not to do it, we can help build the kind of character that will make a huge difference when they become adults.
Yeah, and I think that's also a good point, that how important parenting is. And it's one of the reasons why this podcast took a big break this summer, was because I had a lot of responsibility caring for my two young children. And I take that responsibility very seriously. It's the most important thing in my life, is to ensure that my boys are taken care of emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually. And that comes as a priority over my business. And this past weekend, I did my bi-monthly support of the local food pantry by bringing my neighbors' canned goods to bring to the food pantry. I had about over a dozen neighbors leave bags outside of their homes, and I picked them up and brought them to the food pantry. And I realized there was a little bit of problem with my 3-year-old who wanted to help me, who, when we got to the first house, thought that we were going to carry the canned goods back to our own house. So I had to have a teaching moment and remember that he's 3 years old, and that's his natural instinct is when someone gives you something, you get to keep it. And I will use that quarter analogy you have from now on. I think that would be a really good teaching opportunity for my son. So thank you for giving me that reminder today. I'm just going to take another quick break and we'll get back and talk about the support and advice you want to give our listeners.
You are the kind of person who wants to improve the lives of others, but you need to take pride in your everyday actions. You Are a Philanthropist believes that every act of goodwill deserves to be recognized as philanthropy. Each individual action you take impacts another's life. Believe that what you do makes a difference. So call yourself a philanthropist and start a ripple effect of generosity that boomerangs back to you. Go to youareaphilanthropist.com/shop. Style your outside to match your inside. Choose a t-shirt, hoodie, or bag to show how much you love giving to others. That's youareaphilanthropist.com/shop.
So Ken, you've given us so much wisdom as an older gentleman on my podcast who is able to reflect on his career, his family life. And I want to know what type of wisdom you want to give our listeners about how they can get started in philanthropy.
Start as early as you can, and you're never too old to start.
That's awesome. That's such a good reminder. You're never too old to start. There's no moment like the present, right? Just start right now.
And the other thing, I found out about 10 years ago that I had Parkinson's. And at one point before I had a surgery, it was really affecting what I was able to do. I couldn't carry a paper plate. I would have trouble eating because both my hands were shaking. And it really affected me as a person. It made me feel like everyone had to take care of me, and I wasn't able to do anything, to offer anything to others. Yet I discovered that there were things that I still could do. I didn't have to just give up and shrivel up and sit in a wheelchair all day or whatever that may be. But even when my normal way of reacting and acting and helping and doing wasn't possible anymore, there were still many options for me. I really believe that it was a gift of God that I found out about this surgery. And even though they had to drill holes in my head to make it work, I regained very much of my life again. Now my hands are basically still, and I can do many of the things that I couldn't do before. So I think that as long as we're alive, there's something we can do. Paul was in prison for years of his later ministry, and yet when he couldn't be out preaching and teaching and changing people's lives, he took that time to write what has become a large part of our New Testament. And because of that, because he was not able to get out and preach and teach, he's changed the lives of millions of people. And so we can always find something that we can do if we look beyond ourselves and if we're open to doing the things that God puts into our hands. Then we can be generous with our time, with our thoughts, with our words. Even when you can't move and others have to help you, you can be generous with your thanks, not being upset or critical or grumpy because you can't do something. but being thankful that others are willing to do something for you. And so there's just, if we can learn to get our focus off of ourselves and look to the good of those that are around us, we can really be good philanthropists.
Wow, Ken, there was so much words of wisdom in there. And this podcast often makes me tear up because this type of conversation really touches me. It's encouraging to know that there are people out there who are making the difference in just one person's life. And there's an encouragement for me knowing that people want to support other people in following, what their passions are. And you said how we can be generous with our thanks. And Thanksgiving is coming up. And there's that word alone, thanksgiving, shows the relationship between gratitude and giving. And I actually wrote a blog post about that there's a reciprocity between thanks and giving. And as we get into my favorite part of the year, many people's favorite part of the year, but also some people experience loneliness and stress at this time of year. It's important that we remember to care for people who need it during these end of the year celebrations. And I want to thank you for being a guest on my podcast. I just want to also note how you're a fighter and how you overcame the devastating diagnosis of Parkinson's. But you, even as a Christian man, believed in the science and went out on a limb and found, thankfully, a very skilled doctor who cared for your brain, and also your ability to reflect on what you could do for somebody who had such a serious illness. And I know you're so thankful to have the ability to move your hands in a normal way, and your ability to fight through that illness and look for the hope and look for, the perseverance that's required is really also an inspiration. So I just wanted to say thank you for the gift that you've given me and our listeners for being here today and sharing your wisdom and sharing your story and sharing your inspiration. Thank you so much, Ken.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.